Hey, I'm Shane Smith. I'm here with Thomas, and we're here on an episode of Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. Thomas is one of the attorneys of the Concussion and Brain Injury Group here at Shane Smith Law. Thomas, we're going to talk today about impacts of a concussion. What specifically are we talking about?
Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy.
Now, that's a whole mouthful,
Yes.
Obviously. Is that, and I know they abbreviate it CTE, and now I know why, because that sounds difficult to say and probably difficult to understand. What is that? What is CTE?
Yeah, it's something that's kind of come to light through different sports and different studies that we've had that have resulted from some incidents in sports. Javon Belcher from the Kansas City Chiefs, that was a big incident that happened some time ago. He ended up suffering from CTE and killing himself, killing his family, and raised a lot of questions about what the heck is going on with these different athletes in sports where these seemingly bizarre things are happening because there's no history with him. CTE, it's a degenerative brain disease.
Okay.
And that's associated with repeated head traumas.
So degenerative means it's gonna get worse over time, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Couple impacts over time, they add up, create this cumulative effect where you're rapidly degenerating in brain function.
Now, I've always heard that once you've had one concussion, you're more likely to get another one, just because I guess your brain it's more fragile. So the multiple concussions is definitely what leads to this or makes it much more likely to occur.
Yeah, just repeated head trauma, having that cumulative effect, that couple years down the road, you've aged in terms of your brain health, by decades, years.
So like boxers, football players, or just some of those unlucky people. I mean, I know a guy who honestly had been in, I think, 15 car wrecks by the time he was like 25. And he's like, yeah, 3 concussions and 4, three concussions, 2 broken arms,
Yeah.
I mean, he was just a train wreck for car accidents. But those multiple concussions, they don't have to be close in time together, I guess is what we're talking about.
Right, yeah, they don't have to be close in time to each other, and they might not even show up on someone's radar as being a concussion. I know, in the NFL specifically, you're seeing it in offensive linemen, and offensive linemen aren't getting tackled. They're having that, ball gets snapped, they're popping up, and they're having a collision with somebody, but they're not getting popped in the head. That's a penalty.
Right.
They're just getting a big acceleration, deceleration force, and over time, these guys are, turning 50, and everyone around them, thinks they're 70 or 80 years old.
So it can be the mild concussions, or even the mildest of concussions can lead to this if you have it time after time after time.
Yeah, it can definitely add up. It doesn't have to be a big impact. It can be something smaller. They even call it the silent killer, and that's because the symptoms of this, the CTE, they don't usually appear until years or even decades after the initial injuries happen.
So what exactly is CTE? What happens and what's it cause? Or let's go down to what are the symptoms of what happens when I've got CTE years later, right? What is the killer? What's triggering? What's going on?
One of the things that might put it on your radar that someone might be suffering from CTE could be memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment. There might be impulse control problems.
So is that like today, or is that like 20 years from now when that stuff would all kick in?
Yeah, it could all kind of kick in 20 years down the road. It could be years from the time that somebody was playing a sport or being involved in car accidents. It's one of those things. We're just scratching the surface of this.
So that sounds horrible. I mean, horrifying, honestly. I mean, you could think you're fine, and then 20 years later, bam, and find out it's from something years prior. I guess the only thing you can look out for is if you're having multiple concussions. Make sure you're thoroughly checked out and everything is tested, and just know there's going to be some symptoms. To know you can't just shake off your 3rd or 4th concussion.
Right. Yeah, and making sure that your coaches or different people around you, friends and family, are kind of monitoring those things. And in any contact sport these days, this is something that can be a risk. We think about football, we think about UFC, MMA, different things like that. But I mean, even a sport as low contact as soccer, these guys are jumping up and whacking the ball with their heads, and that can cause.
And that's
concussion.
enough.
Yeah, can definitely do it.
the more we talk about concussions and brain injuries and stuff, the more frightening it is to me, honestly. When we talk about the massive head injuries, okay. But then when we take a step back from that and we go to these, quote, minor head injuries, and we learn about the symptoms and all the stuff that can happen from that minor head injury, it's frightening to me, because those aren't the things you think about. When I hear somebody had a head injury, initially I'm thinking the guy who went to the hospital, who's got to do rehab, all that stuff. They're not the person who goes, maybe this is their third concussion, because they had one playing football and one playing soccer, or they fell once and now they're in a car wreck, all relatively mild, and now they've got all these symptoms, right? And we're worried about things like CTE or other stuff. What else would you tell us about CTE?
Yeah, I think, again, we're scratching the surface of it, and there's lots of studies that are out there. A lot of it, is going to come to light, over the next few years and maybe decades as we continue to find different ways to evaluate what's happening to our brains just through everyday living and contact sports, different things like that. Having the right protective equipment. If there's any parents out there, people are like, oh man, I don't want to have my children involved in anything.
Yeah.
Put them in a bubble and hey, let's just sit at home and look at screens all day. I don't know that that's the right answer. I know that's not the right answer,
yeah.
But there's definitely new equipment that's out there that teams, different sports are using to help minimize these risks. If you're an NFL fan and you watch any of the training camp stuff, you're wondering why the football players look like Marvin the Martian out there from the Flintstones with massive helmets. They've got these big bubble, I think they call them Guardian helmets.
I saw something about that. Some people are making a push for everybody to wear Guardian helmets like all the time.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, like during the games, and it would look like some kind of video game out there. But I guess that's not what it looks like. Isn't the most important thing? It's how it protects somebody.
When we talk about the evolving standards of safety, when I was a kid, we didn't wear bicycle helmets.
Right. Yeah.
We just did whatever, and I can remember probably being in high school. Bicycle helmets were suddenly the new thing, and my mom trying to tell me, hey, you need to wear a helmet. I'm like, yeah, whatever, Mom. Nobody's wearing helmets or anything else. I mean, we didn't even have the option for any modified helmets. It was just this piece of styrofoam, it seemed like.
Right.
But now they're pretty common. Everybody expects to wear them when they ride the bicycles and stuff, right? So
Even when we get my daughter on her little scooter, we got a little helmet for her. It's not like she's falling off or going high speeds, but you want to protect your kids. You want to protect their little skulls. So.
What else? Anything else you would tell us about CTEs or things to look out for in that area?
Yeah, it's a rare condition from what we know right now, and a lot of what we found out when somebody has CTE comes from some sort of volatile or, kind of impulsive or explosive event is one of the ways. You see people degenerate, but then you also see some impulse control things. So a lot of what we know comes from study of essentially like a cadaver, somebody after they've passed, and we're looking inside their brain and we're seeing the accumulation of abnormal proteins. So finding a way to figure out how to do this while someone's living and monitor that ongoing disease process in terms of a brain injury, I think that's maybe the next frontier, is how do we monitor what's going on with someone, and maybe that's that blood test.
I was going to say, we talked about the blood test. That's what it makes me think of. But, I mean, the more I learn about that blood test, the more I think it's going to become almost standard procedure for, like, our high-end athletes, for UFC, for football, and even I could see it's something the emergency room started doing after every major car accident.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just more and more knowledge is what we learn, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things that, we might be talking here today about it, and we think we are starting to get a grip on it, and a week from now we find out something that completely transforms the way we think about it. That's how new this brain science is.
So no longer is it you just have a concussion, though, right? That's not the right phrase anymore, because we've figured out there's just a concussion is a ton of other things, right?
Yeah, it's really too simplistic, and it doesn't really. I think the word kind of does a traumatic brain injury, almost an injustice, because concussion, we think about concuss, we think about an impact, we think about a force, and again, you don't have to have that direct blow. It can be acceleration, deceleration forces.
All right, Thomas, thanks for being on this episode of Mind Matters. For anybody who's interested in concussions and brain injuries, hit like and subscribe, and remember, hit the bell for notifications. And if you've got a question or concern, or you are in an accident, or think you're suffering from a brain injury or concussion and need to talk to somebody like Thomas, just give us a call. You can call us at 980-999-9999. You can ask for Thomas. And remember, if you're in pain, call Shane.
In pain, so I call Shane. 980-999-9999. In pain, call Shane.